Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swirsky's Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swirsky's Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swirsky's Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swirsky Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swirsky Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts, Alex and Shawn. On this episode, even though the Bears are on a bye, they are still making headlines. The Blackhawks break a big losing streak, but Nico is not breaking his team's silence. All this and more on this episode of Bill Swirsky Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they are the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. The next two home games are this coming Friday, November 10th versus San Antonio, and Wednesday, November 15th versus Iowa. So you've got plenty of time to head on over to icehogs.com, pick up tickets for those games, get yourself a hat, shirt, jersey, and more. Tell them Swirsky Sports sent you. Alex, my friend, how is it going?
Going pretty well, despite this pretty crappy weather, but yeah, everything's going pretty well.
Yeah, it is really crappy weather here. It went downhill quick, too. It was nice and then just, boom, terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's the worst combination of cold and rain. Like, it's not cold enough to snow, but it's not warm enough to be like, oh, it's like a spring or summer rain. No, it's cold and dreary, and it's just bad.
Yeah, it's definitely not good weather. And I have a cold allergy. It's the dumbest thing anybody's ever heard of, but I have a cold contact allergy, and it's not so bad like when it's the dead of winter because it's more of a dry cold. But in temperatures like this in November, when it's damp and chilly, I break out in hives.
You know, I have a friend who has a similar condition to that, so I don't think it's all that uncommon.
It is. It really sucks. I keep telling my wife that we should move to California, and she's not flying with that.
Not one. California dreaming.
No, definitely not. So this week we don't have a ton to talk about. This is probably going to be a fairly short episode. Because the Bears are on a bye. The Cubs season is over. Congratulations to the Houston Astros. Which was a really good World Series, I think.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you want to talk about that a little bit, because I thought that World Series had two just absolute classic games in them.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think part of it was there was no team I hated in the series.
Right.
I am indifferent to both teams. I mean, I guess one beat the Cubs, which is annoying, but I really like how the Astros built their team up from scratch, similar to how the White Sox are doing now. And this has to be a positive sign for the White Sox because although Houston is a major market team, kind of like the White Sox, they don't have the money of like a Dodgers or a Red Sox or a Yankees or a Cubs.
Yeah,
and so they're actually still building it, and they've got a World Series championship now. So this has to be a huge boost for the White Sox organization and their fans.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where the accomplishments of the Astros and the Cubs the past 2 years have gone to show that the rebuild works. And heck, even look at the Royals. They took a similar thing where they grew guys from the ground up. Now, the Royals are truly an example of a small market that doesn't have a lot of money, but you see it work for all size markets. You have a huge market in the Cubs. You have a fairly big market, but not the size of the Giants and the Astros. And you had a small market work for the Kansas City Royals. And even like the Giants for those years, they were a little different, but they brought some guys up through like a Bumgarner and a Lincecum and a Buster Posey. So it just goes to show that grooming your farmhand, that's the key to success. And things like just throwing a bunch of money at aging veterans is not the way to do it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees should be the classic example of what to do and what not to do, because just think of their, in the recent years, their most miserable years have been when they had big payrolls.
Yeah.
And now that they're having a resurgence, and they came very close to making the World Series, and it's with homegrown talent or players that they traded for that were minor leaguers that they groomed and then brought up.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about that development, and I think that it really helps for baseball teams to have really good scouting and people in their farm system, because that's how you develop. I mean, when you look at an organization that is successful in baseball these days, you don't just credit one set of guys. You credit everyone who works in that organization, from the big leagues to the minor leagues. I mean, it all makes a difference, because if you want to groom these guys, you got to groom them right. And it's very easy to draft the best guys and get some of the best prospects, but if you don't develop them right, it's not going to matter. So it's really a whole organizational accomplishment of both talent on the field, coaching talent, evaluation talent, scouting talent, and of course, front office talent.
Yeah, and just as a quick jab to our friends in Missouri, is once the hole was closed up where the Cardinals were stealing from the Astros, is Cardinals then don't make the playoffs and the Astros win the World Series.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that. And I think didn't that whole thing happen when they were still in the National League? I can't remember exactly when they said that happened.
I don't remember when it exactly happened, but it definitely did happen, and the two teams go in opposite directions.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about the Cardinals the other day, because I was doing kind of a evaluation for every team, like, okay, what's going to happen in the offseason, what's their status, and the Cardinals right now are kind of in the need to pick a lane. Right now they're in the middle of the intersection, and I'm not sure they know which direction they're going in. So it's really interesting you bring that up, because their style has been kind of similar. They bring up a lot of guys, they have a lot of success with that. They hit something big like on a Pujols or a trade with the Rockies to get what's his face, Holiday. But they did a lot with the prospects and in a similar way, but they didn't always spend a lot of money, and they're just kind of in an awkward spot right now. And I think that what they should do is kind of try to rebuild around their young pitching, but that also means that they're going to need to bring up a lot more like young positional talent, because what we've seen in these rebuilds is positional talent is what makes a big difference. Some franchises try to build around power arms, like the Mets, but you see what happens when your lineup isn't always strong, and you really risk building with power arms, because if they get hurt, you're kind of screwed. So I think that there's a lot to say than just also bringing up prospects. You got to bring up the right type, and you got to develop a wide range of position players and not just build in one area.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Astros are, and the Cubs, both of them, just shows that you bringing up positional players and being able to add veteran arms like a Verlander is the way that's working. The Cubs adding John Lester, them adding Verlander, as opposed to building via arms. And it's going to be interesting to see how it works out for the White Sox, because they have done a little of both. They've got a slew of top talent, young arms, but now they've also got a bunch of bats that are potentially very loud bats and it'll be interesting to see how that flushes itself out in the major league level.
Yeah, and the luxury of the White Sox having just a variety of everything is, you bring up prospects and not every single one is going to pan out, but since you have so many, all you have to do is hit on a few and you're successful. Maybe you hit on a few position players and you really hit on one of those, whether it's a Dunning or a Lopez or a Kopech. If you hit on just a few of those guys, then that's considered a success, and that kind of establishes a good foundation of which to build on. So the more you have, you can never have enough prospects. And also you have the luxury of saying, well, if we have so many, then we can make a trade with some of these guys as well. I mean, the Cubs did the same thing. They traded prospects to kind of complete a championship team, whether it was last year or the year before. So, the White Sox are in a really good position. And like you said, these few successful rebuilds have shown that. And you see a lot of other teams taking a rebuilding approach. However, their rebuilding approach is, they don't have the embarrassment of riches like the White Sox do, because the White Sox had the assets to trade away for those prospects. So, it also kind of depends on where you're at as a front office and how long it takes.
Yeah, and it's funny with the White Sox is my buddy Gary, who's a diehard White Sox fan, is a longtime season ticket holder. I was at his house last week, and he was just telling me, he's like, I was so excited when they got Yoan Moncada about what he would be in the future, and he's like, honestly, he's like, I'm absolutely convinced Jimenez is going to be the much better talent at the major league level.
Maybe. I mean, I think people would look at that and say it's very possible. Sometimes it's hard to judge two guys when they've been in your organization not even a year. I mean, Moncada is going to be in their organization for a year coming, was it December when they traded Sale? So I think there's validity to that, but it's also very hard to judge, I think, as well. But yeah, that's kind of the fun of it, is seeing what you think is going to come of a lot of these guys. I mean, we had fun with it a few years ago, and now White Sox fans are going to have fun with it. Part of me really does agree with them. I think Eloy might be kind of their center power guy.
Yeah, I mean, he really is starting to blossom into what we had hoped he would be with the Cubs, but I think this might end up being a trade that it's one of those, I guess, as a fan, you just really want your team to fleece everybody. That's your goal. But I think, honestly, if you're a Jed and a Theo, you want to win each trade, but I think ultimately is, what the best trade is both teams benefiting, because then you foster this relationship where you're willing to trade with that team again. Whereas if you fleece somebody, until there's new people in the organization, new top management, they probably don't want to deal with you, or are going to be very hesitant about the any sort of trade opportunities. And I think Jimenez for Quintana is going to be a win-win for both teams.
And that's exactly what I said come the trade, when it happened. Exactly when it happened, I said, okay, each team is getting what they wanted. We got a controllable starting pitcher. They got good prospects. That's exactly the goal that each team was trying to make by the trade deadline around the All-Star break. If Quintana keeps doing good things and he helps us get another championship, and then Eloy does the same thing a few years down the road for the Sox, everyone's happy. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's important to realize what you said, is that if trades work out for both teams, then you can have a good business relationship in the future, which, right now it's saying, oh, we want to fleece. But then when you think about it, future endeavors are very kind of important, because you never know where you're going to end up, and it's good to have kind of that relationship. And obviously people worry about getting on the side of the wrong, or on like the wrong side, I should say, of the trade. But, I don't think that we're going to really see that, because I think both assets, whether it's Quintana or Eloy, are going to contribute just fine to their respective teams.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's always been animosity. Animosity might be a little too strong, but there's been some bad feelings from the White Sox towards the Cubs ever since the Sammy Sosa trade.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And how long ago was that? I mean, Sammy's been out of the league for how many years?
Early
That
90s.
trade, yeah, that was. So it's been a long time, and they still are a bit bitter. So I mean, so just think of if you've a fleece like the Jake Arrieta trade with Baltimore. I mean, eventually you realize, all right, that what we got and ultimately didn't end up being anywhere near equal as what we gave up in situations, or vice versa, and those things happen. But when they continually happen, teams are reluctant to trade with you, and it makes it a difficult thing. Is people think these general managers are out on an island? Is general managers in all sports, within a sport, they all talk to each other. They interact. They're constantly on the phone with each other. It's not like they hate each other. There might be bad feelings here and there, but most part, these guys are constantly interacting, either, as friends and colleagues, or as associates that they need to deal with as far as business. I keep bringing up, there was an old Flyers GM that made a swindle of a trade, and he wrote later in his memoirs that trade at the time was the best thing for his career, and ultimately ended up being terrible for his career because he was sort of blackballed, and nobody wanted to trade with him, and nobody wanted to deal with him because they thought he was he didn't play by the rules, and so these guys, there's unwritten rules, and there's things you're supposed to do, and if you win too many trades by landslides, you just get a bad reputation, and nobody wants to trade with you.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it may seem kind of powerful for one moment, but business partnership, even if you're talking about MLB trades here, it's kind of good to have that relationship because of the reasons you just said. So I think that it might have been, to me, the Quintana trade was not only satisfying for both sides, but I think it destroyed a meatball narrative that I was getting kind of sick of, and I think that's kind of big, in my opinion.
But I mean, going back to the World Series, I thought this was a very good World Series, and I sometimes, if there's not interesting matchups in the playoffs, I sort of tune out, and World Series, I'll pick up bits and pieces, but I figured I probably wasn't going to watch much World Series after the Indians went out, and I was disappointed. I wanted to see an Indians, once the Cubs were out, I wanted to see an Indians-Dodgers World Series.
Yeah.
But once the Astros made it, I was like, I'll watch a little bit, but I think they're going to get outmanned by the Dodgers, and they just never, they had no quit in them. And even when Altuve and Correa weren't hitting as well in some games, they were still finding other ways to win.
I had the same exact feeling that you had. I thought, am I really going to invest myself in this? And then I started watching, and I'm like, wow. Because I was with you. I thought the Dodgers had this series. Heck, going into Game 7, I thought the Dodgers were going to win. But the Astros, man, they kept defying the odds. But it's kind of using that term loosely because they were an 100-win team.
Yeah, and it wasn't that I thought that they were a bad team. They're clearly not. I just thought the Dodgers were just so good.
Same.
And the Dodgers are just a phenomenal team, but they just, they ran into a really good team that was just playing great baseball at the time. And that was and the Dodgers didn't play bad, just they ran into a better team.
There were some stats that I'd like to share with you. I don't know if you saw my tweets about them earlier, but you might find this interesting. The past two World Series, so this year and last year, and this does relate to this World Series a lot. I've combined the ERAs of Giles, Chapman, Miller, and Jansen. And if you put those together, that's a 5 ERA. If you take away Ken Giles because he was really bad, that's still like a 3.38 ERA, which for those three guys, in a very limited time, because, your closer, you're not going to be pitching, 15 plus innings all the time in a 7-game series. You get a few appearances and maybe you get a few multiple innings and a couple games, but so still for those guys, a 3.38 ERA is still kind of saying your closer's not fully getting the job done and they're giving up runs. So you saw Jansen blow the save in Game 2, big turning point. You saw him give up the walk-off single in Game 5, also a pretty significant turning point. And then you had Chapman and Miller last year in the World Series get hit around. So, the closers, these dominant closers, have not been as dominant in the World Series the past 2 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, you're right. I never even thought about it like that, but it's, the Astros have far from have a lockdown closer, and they made do. They made do with guys that were pitching on fumes.
Look at Charlie Morton. Who would have thought Charlie Morton would be a World Series hero?
Yeah, and who was the other guy that threw like 22 straight curveballs because he had nothing?
Oh, that was McCullers, I think.
Yeah, McCullers. Just curveball, and they all knew a curveball was coming, and they're just can't hit it. And he was like, I didn't have anything to muster a fastball, and it was just phenomenal to see. And I still would rather have a shutdown closer, but I think what's happened is, all these situations is it the closer not being able to do it, or is it that they're getting leaned on way too hard? Look at the way Roberts managed it. Everyone was praising it for a while until suddenly you're like, well, why is he taking out a guy who's pitching awesome and taking him out after 80 pitches?
Right.
And because he was so set, I go to this guy at this point, I go to this guy at this point, and announcers and baseball pundits were praising it until they ran into the Astros, and the Astros were getting to guys.
Yeah, and Kenley Jensen makes a huge difference, because you look at Kenley Jensen, there were several games where he pitched multiple innings, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Game 2 was really the first time it didn't work because he gave up the game-tying home run.
Well, look how many innings he pitched against the Cubs. And not that many games. And it's a guy. The thing about closers is, if they could do this over a long period of time, they'd be starters.
Right, exactly. And there's a reason that they're relievers.
Yeah, Wade Davis is a failed starter.
Yeah, people forget that.
He's a great reliever. Dennis Eckersley, failed starter. Lee Smith, failed starter.
Andrew Miller, failed starter.
Dominant closers are guys that just, if they had their druthers, they would be starters. They're not, though. So it's, when you put them out there for more than one inning, you're really setting yourself up for a disaster at some point. And luckily the Cubs last year were able to overcome it, because that could have easily been the turning point in that, or the nail in the coffin for that series is Game 7, when Chapman couldn't close it out and just gave up run after run, and and it's also a rallying point for a team if they get to that other team's closer. You know, if you start hitting Kenley Jansen, that's just got to give you such huge confidence boost that you can hit anybody.
Yeah, because, I mean, look at both games he gave up the runs in, the big key runs. I think those were both times he pitched multiple innings, because I want to say game 2, the 9th inning, that was his second inning of work, wasn't it? If I remember correctly. And then in game 5, he pitched a scoreless 9th, and then he gave up the game-winning run in the 10th with 2 outs and nobody on. He hit a batter, and then the next guy got on. I think it was a walk, and then the walk-off single. So those were both times he pitched multiple innings. And I'm not saying that's the sole reason why things didn't go right, but it was pretty clear the Astros weren't afraid of anybody. And that gets me to kind of another question I had for you. Game 7, would you have started Kershaw? Because I know a lot of people who would have.
I mean, look at the numbers that Darvish put up, and I mean, you know, he had some great numbers. Honestly, it was 6 of one, half dozen of the other, and you know, it's easy to look back in hindsight and say, should have started Kershaw. Is, you know, last year against the Cubs, they decided to start Kershaw, and it didn't work out well. So it just, you know, who's to say that wouldn't have happened?
Yeah,
this
and
year?
you know, in my opinion, I think, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, Darvish did not get the job done at all in Game 7, or in the World Series for that matter. But I feel like there's a little bit too much on him because, let's face it, they stranded the entire state of California on the bases in that Game 7. The Dodgers did. They had 2 guys nobody on in several innings. They had leadoff doubles in several innings, and they couldn't get those guys home. I mean, that's got to be a huge, huge, huge reason people should be saying that they didn't win. I mean, look at Cody Bellinger. Was terrible in those situations, but you don't hear him here getting ragged on like Yu Darvish is.
Yeah, I mean, Yu Darvish dominated every other game in the playoffs except the World Series. He was great other than the World Series. And he was great in the regular season. And he's had a really darn good career. I mean, to question him in that start, sure, he didn't get it done. But that's, you know, that's a gamble that you take. And, you know, he should... My questioning of management was not starting Yu Darvish. My question in the management was, why did they let him pitch as long as he did when they clearly just
because what he didn't even make it 2 innings, but he was down 3-0 right before the 2-run home run, I believe. Because I want to say, because it was a 2-run home run by Springer, right, to make it 5-0.
Yeah. Yep. And they should have pulled him before that. And that's my criticism. Starting Yu Darvish, I don't question that, because that's, you know, I felt like there was no wrong decision. I mean, you could have had wrong results, but I didn't think there was a wrong choice in the matter of starting either Darvish or Kershaw. And then Kershaw came in relief and did a great job. But the bullpen just didn't get it. I mean, I guess all these runs were scored, but they were still getting to the bullpen. They were, you know, getting hits, getting guys on. And it was just you just have to hand it to the Astros, because I honestly just think that they weren't afraid of anybody, like you said, and they were going to go.
I mean, look who they got through to get there. They got past the Boston Red Sox with Chris Sale, now on the Boston Red Sox. They got through that. They hit Chris Sale hard. Then, real hard, yes.
Real hard.
Then they faced the Yankees. And it doesn't matter if they're the Baby Bombers or the Bronx Bombers. When you are a major league team and you say we beat the Yankees in the playoffs, that is always a big, big, big accomplishment. And they were down in that series 3-2, and they had to beat them twice in elimination games, in Game 6 and Game 7. And once again, here's the big hero, Charlie Morton, pitched phenomenal against the Yankees in Game 7. 5 innings, no runs, only 2 hits. He was striking out guys. They beat CC Sabathia. I mean, when you say that when a Game 7 comes down to Morton and Sabathia and the Yankees, you're like, wow, that's a huge accomplishment. And now they had to play this Dodger team at Dodger Stadium in Game 7 with this Dodger team that was making headlines since day one of the season.
Yeah, it's a big accomplishment, and I'm really proud of the Astros. I mean, I had no skin in the game, but it was just fun. I sat down here and I stayed up late some nights watching games, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And other than last year with the Cubs Indians, which even if I wasn't a Cubs fan, if I had no skin in that game, that was a really good World Series too. But you don't always get a good World Series.
Oh, we've had plenty of bad ones over the years. I mean, look at the 2012 World Series. That was bad. The 2006 World Series, that was bad. Yeah, we've had some stinkers.
I think my least favorite that I could, if you were to just ask me without having to do some deep thought and researching, right off the bat, I would say my least favorite one was the Mets-Yankees one. Where everybody on ESPN was so excited. This is going to be the one that everybody wants to see. And then really nobody cared outside of New York.
And it was one of those things where, though there were some close games, it wasn't like the Yankees won that series in 5. It's not like it was imagine if it was a 7-game series. Like, that would be something. Game 7, Mets-Yankees. But, I mean, the Yankees took that one in 5. So a lot of people would tell you the same thing. Like, the hype was there, and then it didn't really live up to the hype.
Yeah, I just, there was no interest for the rest of the country, and it wasn't that good of a. I mean, you could gain interest by having good games. It was as close to a whitewash as you could get, and nobody from the rest of the country cared.
It was kind of like what's another example of that? Look at 2003. Who cares about Marlins Yankees, especially when you knew you were on the verge of getting the best World Series in history, and then both teams fell apart, and instead you got Yankees Marlins. Like, no one cared.
Yeah, but the flip side is what was it? Diamondbacks?
Yeah.
Was it Diamondbacks Yankees? They with Schilling and
The Martinez or
Randy
the
Johnson.
Luis Gonzalez
And-
walk-off.
Like that series just I didn't have any interest in it. But then when I actually sat down and started watching the games, I was like, this is a
I'd still
really
say
good
that's
series.
one of the best World Series in history. When you look at the games in that series and you look at where it all came down to, the best closer in the world, and the Diamondbacks get to him and win on a walk-off single. I mean, that was a classic.
Yeah, I had so little interest in that World Series going into it, and it was just I don't know. Like I had a free night one night, and I was like, I'll just flip on board. I'm gonna flip on the World Series, and then I was like, this is a really good game. And then I got into them, and then that last game, I was just like on the edge of my seat because I had no interest in I didn't care who won, but the way it went down, I was just like, this is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was really something. That was one of the first World Series I could honestly remember watching as a kid because some of our good family friends, they're from Arizona and they're big Diamondbacks fans, and we were watching, was it Game 5 or 6? It was one of those games. It was on Halloween. We were there for Halloween, and we were watching that game. And that's one of the first World Series I can really remember watching. And like you said, it's like, well, at first, Yankees again, man. An expansion team, Diamondbacks, meh. But I mean, wow. And you had some premier talent in that World Series on both sides, whether it was Big Unit and, Derek Jeter, Paul O'Neill, all that stuff. You look back at it and it's like, wow, that really was a good one.
Yeah, I absolutely loved that one. I'm trying to think of what was the first World Series I remember watching.
Probably a bit before my time, I'd assume.
You know what? I would probably have to say it was 83, the Orioles Phillies.
Yeah, those Orioles won that one, right?
I think that was the Orioles won that one, and I think that's part of the reason why Cal Ripken was always my favorite player, is because I think that was the first World Series that I remember. I mean, I may have watched one younger, but I was like 6 then, and it's the first one I can remember watching, and I was just so into it. And Cal Ripken did a great job in there, and I was like, he's a rookie, he's doing great, and he became my all-time favorite player. And him and Eddie Murray were always like two of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean that's way before my time, but I've definitely seen the film from that World Series, and obviously the next year as a Cubs fan, you almost had a World Series for our boys, but that didn't happen. But yeah, I mean it's always fun looking back at like the first championships you can remember. One World Series I'll never forget in my lifetime, just because like I was so bitter about it. I'll never forget how angry I was when the Rangers blew it in 2011 twice. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
I was just, because, back then,
Absolutely.
the Cardinals were everything and the Cubs were nothing. And it killed me to see that. Because I remember thinking back at like a really late series against them where we were on the verge of knocking them out and Marmol blew another save, like on a wild pitch. And I thought, we let them in to do this. And it's amazing how the tables have turned now, but, I'll never forget that World Series.
I think for me, the two most vivid ones, not that were not recent, would be the 88 and 89 World Series. 88, the Dodgers and the A's.
Kirk Gibson.
And then and I just remember that because I was, at that time, I was like 11, 10, 11, and, it's when you start to have like vivid memories as a child, and like I remember watching that, and I saw the Kirk Gibson thing live, and I think I pumped my fist all the time for probably a year, and then the 89 Oakland and San Francisco, and I didn't, and that one, that was another like matchup I vividly remember from growing up, and it's funny because I'm looking.
Well, that one had the earthquake, didn't it?
The next one. Yep. And that was, so it was something I was watching, and then it was also part of the news as well. Like, so it was just a vivid one. But then the next one, 90, is Cincinnati versus Oakland. Like, I couldn't even, if you would have, I just looked it up now, and I was like, if you would have put a gun to my head before I looked this up, it asked me who was in that World Series, I probably would be dead right now because I couldn't recall it. That's how.
Yeah, there's always those World Series out there. Like, I remember watching the final out of this World Series, but in 2008 when the Phillies won, I was so unbelievably pissed off about the Cubs just getting killed in the NLDS. Like, I just turned my back to baseball until, like, that final game. And then when I saw Brad Lidge strike out whoever was batting for the Rays, and I saw them celebrate, I just turned the TV off, just slammed the remote on the ground, and said, damn it, that should have been us. It had nothing really to do with the matchup, because the Rays were a really good team that year, as were the Phillies. but I was so mad about the way the Cubs just fell apart in that playoffs. Like, I couldn't watch baseball.
Yeah, I remember that one pretty well because I lived in Philly up in.
I was going to say, you would have been
June
in that area at some point, right?
Yeah, I moved back to Chicago I was, what year did I move back? Yeah, no, I moved back in June of 2008. So it was right before the end of that season. And so it was fun for me because I pretty much hated all the Philadelphia teams except for the Phillies. I kind of
they were a pretty exciting team, those old Phillies.
Yeah. And so I always hated the Eagles and I hated the Flyers and but I had a soft spot for the Phillies, so it was fun for me because the Cubs were really good and the Phillies were good, and so but I was glad I wasn't there for the them to celebrate because Philadelphia fans are the worst, and I would hate to see them happy.
I think a lot of people feel the same way. I'm kind of indifferent about them, but I haven't lived there, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, they're pretty brutal. But moving on. I was really not going to say anything about the Bears, but Jerrell Freeman.
Yeah, that kind of came out of nowhere because everyone was talking about the very, very terrible thing that I'm sure we'll get into. Yeah, I mean, that one really came out of nowhere because everyone was talking about Zach Miller, which I'm sure we'll talk about very soon. But yeah, I saw it and I said, wow, really? I mean, there must be something, pretty seriously wrong with him right now if there's multiple suspensions with using illegal drugs or whatever it was.
Yeah, I figured after last season, what are the odds that he's going to do it again? And I just was in the back. I mean, not even in the back of my mind. It was just kind of, out of my realm of thought. And then just out of the blue, oh, hey, Jerrell Freeman got a 10-game ban for using illegal substances. And I was like, oh, what the hell?
Yeah. I was so busy focusing on other Bears things, and then all of a sudden I just saw a tweet from them say that, and then I got the update on my phone. I just said, wait, what? He's not even playing right now. What? It just, not a good situation.
No, it's just dumb. And I mean, at some point you've had more than one player now suspended for using banned substances under this regime. Is like, don't you have somebody
about it?
Yeah, like where is the organizational why aren't they looking into this? Why don't they have somebody there that's if it really is them not knowing, which I doubt, but if it's them not knowing and using some sort of supplement, why isn't there somebody on the staff that they go to and be like, can I take this? And you say, no, can't take this. Yes, you can take this. Why isn't there that person? And why isn't there a stronger stance from this organization about if it is knowingly taking something they're not supposed to take? Why doesn't that exist? Because this isn't happening to a lot of other organizations.
Right. I mean, the fact that this is happening multiple times, it suggests that there's some bigger issues than we may not realize right off the bat. And, that doesn't really speak well of the organization, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because with Freeman and Trevathan, you have a very good linebacking tandem and on a blossoming defense, and between not being able to stay healthy and not being able to keep his nose clean, is you've lost Jerrell Freeman.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad because even though he was injured, it's like, well, he may be injury prone, but what we did see from him when he was healthy earlier this year was pretty good, but now you have to deal with this again, and it's just a really shame that it has to be this way. But the organization clearly needs to clamp down on this because, like I said, if this is happening multiple times, something really is not right here.
It's just a frustrating situation, and I would be very surprised if the Bears, kept him on the roster. I would imagine once he's healthy, they'll part ways with him because it's, what's the point of having this guy that when he's playing he gets hurt and he's just getting suspensions as well. It's going to put him under a microscope once he's failed 2 tests, and it's going to put the team under a microscope. So I just don't see the need of keeping a Jerrell Freeman around, which sucks because I think he's a very good football player.
And I was so exciting when we signed him too, but unfortunately things haven't worked out.
Yeah. And you previously alluded to Zach Miller, and we talked a little bit about that last episode, the injury and how gruesome it looked. And
it was even worse than we thought.
It was worse than we thought, and I feel awful, because for those that don't know, is they were worried there was vascular damage, and the medical professionals that they have on the sidelines, they're trained for things. So if there's a neck injury or head injury, they know to respond immediately and stabilize the player's neck and do these things, and they go through these drills. But pretty much everybody that watches football knows this. They'll bring the ambulance out on the field and put them on a stretcher and stabilize the neck, and that's the routine. And people understand that and know that procedure when those things happen. But I don't think everybody knows that they do this as well when there's potential for vascular damage. So what could have very easily happened with Zach Miller is if the vasculature, so the veins and arteries are damaged, they were worried they would have to amputate his leg from that situation.
I mean, it's life-threatening. When you have damage to that's life-threatening right there. And
so, there's got to be a lot of praise for the Bears medical staff.
Oh, there has to
well. Be. Yeah. That's because they just really, and the New Orleans Saints as well, there should be praise to their medical staff because both of them responded very quickly to the situation and got him to the hospital quickly, and he underwent the procedure to repair the vasculature and make sure they saved his leg. I mean, not even worrying about his career. That's an afterthought, is saving this guy's leg so he can, his life in his leg, so he can hopefully have a normal life, even if he never plays football again.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing as well is, Zach Miller's been playing a game he loves and he's been a valuable asset, but, unfortunately this could very likely be the end of his career, but you know what? If he gets to keep his leg and live a healthy life, that's what's important. And, you give props to all the medical people at the Superdome for both the Bears and the Saints, and you give credit to those surgeons at the hospital in New Orleans who worked to save his leg, because all those people deserve credit. And, props on the Bears, too, for kind of keeping us updated throughout the process and assuring that he was in the best of care. We saw, I think, George McCaskey or somebody visited him, as well as other people. And then you saw a lot of prayers and well wishes on social media and in, written publication form from Bears teammates, other players in the NFL, writers, journalists, broadcasters, fans. It was really good to see a lot of people coming together and wishing well for Zach Miller, because that's a pretty scary situation. And when we talked about knee dislocation the day before that news came out, remember we talked about and said that knee dislocation, the the damage can vary. It could be pretty darn serious, and it was pretty darn serious.
Yeah, and this was a similar injury that we saw happen with have an old man moment, the quarterback from the Vikings,
Bridgewater?
yeah, Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah.
But he didn't have there was no vascular damage at all, and no nerve damage. So he's back to being able to an NFL career, but that unfortunately it's not the case with Zach Miller, who does have vasculature nerve damage, and he's an older player. It's just a sad situation, but it was nice to see. Apparently, a lot of Saints players went to visit him in the hospital.
Yeah.
And they have no ties to this guy other than they played against him one time, and they showed up. That has to be a good feeling.
Absolutely. Just like all the other players that never played with him before were sending him well wishes.
Yeah, so you hope the guy has a full recovery, and it would be an amazing story if he was able to play a down ever again. But I just think this is a career for him, and even if he could play again, I mean, I'm sure his wife and his kids will have something to say if he wants to. I know my wife and kid would be like, no, this is gruesome injury, and that's even to say is if he has just I've been reading countless stories about these gruesome injuries, and they said the medical procedures to get them physically fixed is the easy part. And they said there's a roadmap to how to train to get back to the shape, but they said just psychologically this is a really tough thing to overcome. And
of course.
And that's why it's just what Adrian Peterson did when he tore his ACL, coming back so quickly and coming back at a top level was just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's really a shame that not only Zach Miller is suffering these injuries, but look, we just had Deshaun Watson tear his ACL too. How many serious injuries have we seen this year?
A lot. Houston's got two big ones, J.J. Watt and Deshaun Watson. And that's my thing is, people are already like, oh, the Bears made a big mistake by skipping over Deshaun Watson and trading up for.
I'm so sick of that.
Oh, I know. It's you're judging guys based on a handful of games in their rookie year.
For a guy who has a full offensive unit with a guy who's just throwing to practice squad kids.
Yeah, if you were to do this, you would have already put Robert Griffin III in the Hall of Fame, and that guy is like in his 20s and out of football. So
right, exactly. Remember, he was supposed to be the thing.
Yeah. So I'm not knocking Deshaun Watson, but there's a long way to go on these before you can make these comparisons. And the poor guy suffered a major injury right there, and you're not going to see him. You're not going to see him until the middle of next season.
It's just, that's just brutal. I feel so bad for him because he was fun to watch. And, he was doing some really good things. And then for that to happen to him, that's the other thing about a lot of these injuries. They're just freak accidents. Zach Miller, freak accident. Deshaun Watson, freak accident. A lot of these other ones, just freak accidents.
Bridgewater did that same injury on a walkthrough.
Yeah. It just goes to show.
Walkthrough. It's when you have, your joints can only handle so much, and when these guys get bigger and faster and stronger, they're you may be able to get the muscles bigger and stronger, but those ligaments and joints, they are only made to handle so much.
And it's my family, we come from a line of bad knees, and I've dislocated my knee and sprained my knee several times. And you know what? Sometimes all it takes is just one awkward step for your knee to just briefly pop out of place and sprain it. You know, it's just freak stuff.
Yeah, I was born with crooked kneecaps, so they're not aligned straight. And what sets it off sometimes? Sitting in a car with my legs bent too long.
Yeah.
And then I'm gimping around for weeks. They're a funny joint. And when you're a guy that's 200 some pounds and you're running like a gazelle, things happen.
And as you probably know, knee injuries can be some of the worst pain you ever feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because, me as a kid was that turning point when guys were just so much bigger and faster and stronger. But if you look at like the mid to late 80s, mid to late 70s, is guys weren't that big and strong. I remember as a kid when University of Michigan, they were like, every single one of their offensive linemen is now 300 pounds. And everyone was just blown away by that. And that was probably late 80s. And everyone was just blown away by that. And now, can you imagine a major college football program, let alone the NFL, that has an offensive lineman under 300 pounds?
Oh, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. No way.
Just guys were they were, big guys, but they were not out of the realm of average, average guy, big size. You could be an offensive lineman back in the 60s and 70s. You could be like 240 pounds and be an offensive lineman in the NFL. And now you're like 340.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to see how athletes have changed over time in major sports when it comes to like size and, muscular type shapes. But it goes to show you can be in great shape, but you can still get injured like that in freak ways.
Absolutely. Let's move on to, do you want to talk about Nikolai Mirotic, or do you want to talk about the Blackhawks?
It doesn't matter to me, whatever you like.
Let's talk about Nico real quick.
Okay.
This is something we've pretty much avoided for a while, and because the Bulls are terrible. But this, I can't even remember if we even brought it up at all, but I think everybody at this point knows that Bobby Portis punched Nikolai Mirotic in the face and wrecked his face. But now it's getting to the point where Mirotic wants nothing to do with Portis, and I think they're going to have to trade him.
Yeah, I think so too.
And with the fact that he stunk last year, and you had to pay him a bunch of money, not because he was worth it, but because you had to meet the salary cap floor. I don't know if anybody's going to trade for Mirotic. You might have to trade Portis.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be that disappointed if they did. If you want my opinion, this is Lauri Markkanen's team now, and I think that he deserves all the playing time he should get. Because remember, going into the season before that whole fight, I think he was like third on the depth chart. And look how he's played. I don't think anyone should stand in his way. So they can make whatever moves they want with those guys, and I honestly wouldn't be upset about it.
Yeah, and I think that, I honest to God think that the Bulls are in tank mode. And you can't tell me otherwise when Dunn has played pretty well for the most part, and they keep starting and giving minutes to Grant.
Yeah.
This Bulls team they're just giving up, and they're looking for somebody good to pair with Markkanen, because Markkanen is really good.
Yes, he is. And he is someone that's been really fun to watch so far. You have guys like LeBron James who are saying, yeah, this kid's impressive, which is a good start. I think he deserves all the playing time, like I said, But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a tanking year. The ideal Bulls game from here on out is Lauri Markkanen has a great game, but they lose. That's the ideal thing.
Yeah, and because you worry that they're gonna be able to pair him with somebody, because I think that's what you saw in New York is you got Porzingis and he's been really good, and they don't know who to pair with him.
Right.
You know, they've tried Carmelo, pairing him with Carmelo. They've with Derrick Rose, with Joakim Noah, and just you're not getting the right chemistry there, and then their system is not right, and his style isn't meshing with other people. You're not getting the positive result that you should have with having a good player like Porzingis, and that's what I worry about with Markkanen. But he is fun to watch. He can't play defense worth a lick, but boy, is he a good offensive weapon.
Yeah,
and it's not just his 3-point shooting. It's the guy can dribble. He looks pretty darn good for a rookie coming from Europe.
Yeah, and he can't play defense very well, but he's 20 years old, and if he's showing this much offensive prowess so far, I'm only excited at how he's going to develop further into the future. So we have a really good asset on our hands with him. I think we should be very happy about that. The good thing about this Bulls team being, a team that's not going to win a lot of games, I'd rather see a team not win a lot of games with a bunch of young guys than seeing a team not win a lot of games with a bunch of old, washed-up guys. So we're already in a better position technically than we were last year, because that was a mediocre team that got into the playoffs because they're in a bad conference with a bunch of old guys. So, we're in a better position. It may seem weird, but we are in a better position now than we were before, because at least we're younger now. We have some young assets that we're looking to move forward with, and we should have a bad enough record to get at least a decent pick.
And Zach LaVine will be back.
Yeah, that's going to be something big to watch when he does come back.
So, yeah, I mean, not much else to talk about is because this Bulls team is terrible, and and it's going to be fun to see when they do the lottery pick, and hopefully they can get the number 1 pick.
Oh, that'd be great. That would be really great.
As long as they don't have that 76ers luck.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past the Bulls, but you know what? I mean, at least we have one young asset that's already looking really good, so we have that.
Yeah, I mean, the Sixers have had how many that have had injuries or other weird things going on, and this year I was like, all right, was it Markelle Fultz? I was like, this guy looks really good. I think this is kind of a can't miss. And then between summer league and training camp and the regular season, the guy forgot how to shoot.
Yeah.
Like his release is completely different, and he can't shoot worth a lick. He can't even shoot free throws, and you're like, what happened to this guy?
It's the 76ers curse, man.
It really is. I mean, it's hilarious from as an outsider looking in. I mean, it probably is not funny if you're a Sixers fan or part of that organization, but I think it's hilarious. This how bad luck they have, lately.
Yeah, it's become. I don't want to go this far, but they're kind of turning into a Browns, like the Browns of the NBA, where they keep getting all these high picks and things just continue not to work out, and it's just a rotating door of different guys. Obviously, I don't think anyone will reach Browns status of just being the Browns, but the 76ers are starting to somewhat remind me of them.
Yeah, you have every high draft pick there is and still can't.
I mean, they
capitalize.
drafted Michael Carter-Williams high. Remember that? We lost the Tony Snell trade. Put that in perspective.
But I guess the last thing we'll talk about is the Blackhawks. They were on a pretty bad losing streak going into last time we talked. and they only had one game since the last episode, and I was glad they won because they beat the Flyers, and if they lose to the Flyers, I have to hear it until the next time they play from my wife, who's a Flyers fan. But the Flyers are another team that's got talent, but they were struggling as well, and it was kind of a battle of teams that were struggling, and the Blackhawks, definitely had the more positive of the takeaways of the two teams.
Yeah, and it wasn't the best game played by the Hawks, but at least it was better than some of their previous efforts. Let's say that.
Yeah, I mean, Crawford looked
Yes,
great.
he did.
I mean, the Flyers had some A-plus chances of scoring, and he went 35 of 35 and shut them out. The penalty kill looked good. The Blackhawks kill all three of the Flyers' power plays, and including two of those power plays, Jonathan Toews was in the box. So it's when you can kill penalties with Jonathan Toews in the box, that's a real big positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think that they finally scored a power play goal. There were still a lot of frustrating power plays in that game, but you saw some big plays in key times, and you're thinking, well, that's a start, right? That's how you gotta kind of get back into a groove. And right now, the Blackhawks are in a very frustrating game with the Wild, where they've gotten plenty of chances and they can't get anything past Devin Dubnyk. So it's one of those scenarios where you're saying you got to take everything in stride, because look, they've had some really bad games recently, and in order to kind of regroup here, you got to start doing all the little things correctly again. So that's a long way to go in the season, but you don't want to skid for much longer.
Yeah, and it's funny because the Blackhawks on the power play have been
Very bad.
so bad. I mean, not just bad, but so bad. And the one they scored on, they looked good. They won a face-off. They had a quick puck movement. You got net front presence, but it was on their fourth power play of the night.
Yeah, it was. It was almost it almost felt like to me it was not that they did as much right, is that they've had so many scoreless power plays, they were just due to have a bounce go their way.
It was in the first three power plays of the night were so bad. When that fourth one came, I almost changed the channel because I didn't want to see another dumpster fire of a power play. And I was glad I didn't, because they looked great.
Yeah, and I asked, where the heck has that been? But like I said, right now it's a scoreless tie 0-0 in Minnesota. They've gotten a lot of chances. Dubnyk shut them down, but at least they're looking a bit better. So like I said, they need to find a stride here. Some tough matchups coming down the road. Now's the time, I think, to really regain things, even though it is early, because you saw the articles with Coach Quenneville in the practice, how he was not happy with the team, and there were questions about losing the locker room. And just to me, if you're hearing all that stuff, it's in the team's best interest to really start picking things up as soon as possible before things could potentially get any worse.
Yeah, and one of the frustrating things lately has been on the blue liners, and in that Flyers game, you saw some shakeups of the defensive pairings. They had Keith with Franzen, who I was actually pretty happy with this pairing. I think Franzen has been playing really
he's been
well.
okay.
I think he's deserved more minutes. So I thought that pairing was really good. And then you had the Jan Ruda, Brent Seabrook pairing, which was pretty worrisome to me because Ruda went on his offside, and Seabrook's been pretty terrible this year for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that pairing was great, but they didn't play too bad. You had Seabrook had some good sticks. in that game. And you're starting to see Jan Ruda get comfortable playing the other side, which is good because it makes him a little more versatile. And then the third pairing was the Michael Kempny Murphy pairing, and this pairing was pretty bad.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
I just don't know what you do. You just wonder, is Murphy bad, or is he just can't play in this system? Because you could think back to other defensemen that Joe Quenneville has just been frustrated with and didn't think could play, and they move on from him and they end up playing well somewhere else. It's a system thing, because the Blackhawks system for defensemen is unique.
Yeah, I don't know. He's kind of a difficult one for me right now. I gave him the benefit of the doubt looking at some of his stats over the years because he clearly had talent, but he was on a really bad Coyotes team. And you figured coming to the Blackhawks, he'll have a much better supporting cast. And, maybe it is the system. Maybe he just hasn't found his niche yet. But I'm not sure I'm completely ready to give up on him yet because we really don't have much of a choice. We need some younger defensemen in there. We can't just rely on, old guys all the time.
Yeah, and I just think, though, that if they're going to keep using that Kempny Murphy pairing, is they're going to have to be better about when they have them in. Is you're probably going to want them in alongside the top forwards line, because those are the better puck possession guys. You don't want forwards that don't chase down defensively like a Kane, being with those guys, because that's a recipe for giving up goals. Is you want to at least pad them a little bit as much as you can.
Right, exactly. And I think that's something, we're used to seeing a kind of a blender of lines and things changing here and there. And I think with Connor Murphy, they're going to try to do everything they can to make him work. And if they're going to try to do that and make adjustments quick, and if things don't change quick, Quenneville's going to put him in the doghouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And yeah, in this game, I've just been watching bits and pieces of it because I have to crane my neck to see the TV. You're seeing a struggling offense. The Blackhawks don't have consistent pressure. They don't. They're just the things that they've been doing. And they've got a lot of shots on goal, but it's the puck possession is something they really struggle with.
It's like I said, how they look much better in this game. That's kind of saying something because it shows how bad they've looked in some of the previous games. And like I said, I'm not saying they look perfect by any means, because they don't. There's still some bad passing. There's still some poor puck handling. It seems like when they enter the zone, oftentimes they get stripped way too easy. But you got to at least... How do I say this? They got to at least be generating as many shots as they can, because when you're a struggling offense, you got to take everything you can get, because, I think anything more, they try to be more fancy. That's going to cause more problems, and that's kind of the frustrating reality of it right now.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it, is the Blackhawks are winning the 60% of the faceoffs.
Yeah, they're doing a very good job with that.
But yeah, they've just got to be able to sustain offense. It's this whole season, it's just been a lot of one-timers and then they lose possession of the puck. There's no sustained offense where they take a shot, either put the rebound back in the net or pass the rebound back out and maintain possession. They're not doing those things. It's really frustrating because they feel like they're playing on their heels so much.
And when they do get a lot of shots,
compared to,
particularly like in the Predators game a few days ago, they're easy shots. They're right at him, and it's not like they're generating a lot of chances. Where in this game, they're at least generating a few more chances, but even some of the golden chances they have, they're not finishing. They're shooting the puck wide or missing the net, so they're generating chances and some shots, but they're not really finishing it as much as you want them to.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating to watch. You know, I realize that you don't need a ton of scoring to be an entertaining game or a non-frustrating game, but there's a way to have good pressure and play well on offense and maybe not score as many points but still look competent out there. The Blackhawks, they've been really struggling, and it's they have too many good talents this as forwards to be this inept at scoring.
Right, and it kind of goes back to one of the things we talked about is you see teams being able to outskate them and use their speed to outskate them and their size to be physical with them. Obviously, the Hawks have never been a physical team, and that's never been a problem. They've always used finesse to get around that, but if the physicality you're facing also has speed and finesse to it, then yeah, that's kind of a problem. So, it's going to be kind of a tough thing to adjust to.
Yeah, if you have small, fast skaters, that's been their recipe, is being able to skate around bigger, more physical skaters. But now that teams have bigger physical skaters that can also skate well and skate fast, they're just like you said, they're moving the Blackhawks off the puck, and the Blackhawks just in those 50-50 puck battles just can't win them, and it's leading to a lot less time on the offensive side of the ice.
Right, and we kind of see what we know what the problem is. It's just we're waiting for the problem to be fixed or adjustments to be made, and it just seems like night in, night out, you see the same problems. And like I said earlier, we saw that kind of go away in the first two games, and that's when a lot of optimism came back, and then it's like, well, those same problems are kind of coming back now, and they're consistently showing. At least in the last two games, they've looked a little better than the past 5 games, because those games against the Predators, against the Avalanche, and against the Blues, and against the Knights, I mean, that was just flat awful. But you look at this team and say, well, they should be able to make adjustments sooner or later because we know how good they are, we know what they've done, but it's been kind of a trouble adjusting, and we may have to face the reality that this really is something hard to adjust to if everyone else is out skating them and they're being just outplayed in every single way. If teams are using their speed to get around them, like I said, that's a hard thing to adjust to. It makes you face that sad reality that, other teams are built to beat us now. Are you concerned at all about the whole practice thing and the so-called lack of effort? And, you heard the clips or the snippets of what they said in the locker room. Oh, we're not worried, we're fine, yada yada. And then Sharp says, it's good to be optimistic, but I feel like there has to be a bit more of a sense of urgency. Does that concern you in any way?
Yes, very much so. Just hearing Quenneville say that he's so disappointed in practices and with the intensity, and seeing the result on the ice, and seeing the lack of performance on the ice in games, and then hearing players, veteran players that know what it takes to win a championship and knows the frustrations of defeat in, when you have a good team. It really does make me concerned. I mean, am I thinking the sky is falling or this team is done? No, but I think we've all come to the realization that there's no such thing as a switch that they can flip.
Right.
And they need to work these things out and figure them out early, because if you wait until the end of the season, then you're really pressing.
Yeah, that's not good.
And you go into the playoffs. Yeah, you go into the playoffs gassed and nothing in the tank.
Right. And, I think it speaks volume to me that they're saying, we're fine. And then Sharp says, well, there needs to be more sense of an urgency here. I think that can kind of be revealing in the fact that you're saying, well, you see the same problems over and over and lack of adjustments. And if they keep saying they're fine and content with everything, well, the two might correlate a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, you could say fine in public, but these guys can't be thinking fine when they see the performance out on the ice.
Right.
They've got to recognize that there's some issues here. Every team is flawed, but you have to be able to address these issues, and whatever methods they're using to address these has not been effective.
Right. And I think that there are a lot of people wondering, saying, well, is there needed of a change of a coach? Is there need of a change of, leadership? And I think that maybe some people are taking a very far out approach to that thought, but I think that there is the right idea of some sort of a change is needed, whether it's in philosophy or the way the team does things. It may not be as extreme as firing a bunch of people and trading a bunch of people, but there's obviously got to be some sort of adjustment here. And like we've said on previous shows, the whole thing with Quenneville is, I think you could make a legitimate argument of thinking that his time here is somewhat short, that this season could be the last if things don't get, drastically better. Let's say they make it to the playoffs, get killed in the first round again. Let's say, God forbid, they don't make the playoffs, or things just don't go well. But I think that we can't just throw in the towel yet, but we have to realize that things got to get significantly better in many areas if they want to keep going with this, because I think this season's going to tell a lot. It's going to tell what the coaching future is going to be. It's going to tell the future of some of the other players on this team. And if they want to keep going with this scheme, they're going to have to make some adjustments. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that the seats may be warming up here, but I'm not sure I'd go out and say, clear everything out right now, do this, do that. I think they have the capability to make some of these adjustments, but it's not going to be easy. And we may see some, ugly times, and we may see some great times. It's hard to predict right now, but there are places of concern.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one for me is the Blackhawks are giving up so many scoring opportunities.
Right.
And eventually, as great as Corey Crawford is, he is human, and there's that law of averages. You're going to see him eventually start giving up some goals, because he can't sustain the save percentage that he's had this season. And eventually, when something's got to give with how many shots they're giving up and his amazing save rate, you're gonna eventually see either the Blackhawks have to shore things up, or Corey Crawford's gonna start giving up goals at a higher rate. And if that's the case, it's bad news for the Blackhawks.
Relying on a goalie to stand on his head all the time is not a recipe for success.
Yeah, I mean, in the playoffs, yeah, you sort of have to have that a little bit, but you can't do that all season long. But I've heard multiple people start to suggest that maybe the Blackhawks should consider the neutral zone trap. And I mean, it's an interesting thought, and I don't know if that's the time, or now's the time to start playing a trap, neutral zone trap, but in the middle of the season. But I mean, it's gaining in popularity, and it's one way to slow down the speed of the attackers entering the zone.
Well, I mean, look, if they keep having the same defensive problems, it almost feels like, why not try it? Sometimes you gotta take chances to try to make things better. I feel like that is something that a lot of teams would probably work on before the season, preseason, so bringing it into like the middle of the regular season would be a bit more difficult. But if things continue to not work defensively, then you might have to try to shake things up in somewhat of a desperation move.
Yeah, and you just hope that if they do something like drastic like that, it can create problems for the other team entering the zone and hopefully create turnovers that allow the Blackhawks to have odd man rushes or more opportunity to have offensive possessions.
And this is all part of sports, not just hockey. When you have talented guys that have natural ability to make plays, but they get older and they're a bit more limited, then you have to take those guys and adjust your game plan and try to find other ways of being effective. I mean, like I said, it's not just hockey. You look at a lot of pitchers who lose their velocity over years, they adjust their game to try to get outs in another meaning, and same could be applied to this Blackhawks defensive core with like a Seabrook and a Keith that aren't as quick as they once were, can't catch up with guys just as well as they used to. So you might have to make those kind of adjustments to your play for them to be effective. That's how sports goes a lot of the times.
Absolutely. But, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Hopefully the Hawks can turn this one around and come out with a big victory against the Minnesota
There's
Wild.
one more thing I want to ask you kind of quickly before we sign
sure.
off. I meant to ask you this
Sure.
earlier, but it kind of slipped my mind. It's about the Blackhawks. I don't know about you, but I feel like the Blackhawks, like hype and popularity in the city, has just been absolutely non-existent this year.
I mean, among the people the people I see that are still with the Blackhawks hype are people that I've seen with the Blackhawks hype since, before they had Taves and Kane. But the bandwagon fans have definitely, maybe I wouldn't say jumped off, but they've lost interest. And I think you've seen that with the ratings a little bit. There've been ratings dips as well.
Yeah, because I don't know. I watch a game, and I like to talk a lot on the Twitter community when there's Blackhawks games, or I look at some of the other Blackhawks outlets when I'm writing about them or reporting about them or talking about them in some way. And it just seemed like a few years ago, every Blackhawks game night, everyone was hyped up and ready. Now, I'll look at my Twitter feed and, I'll still have my diehard Hawks fans talking about them and, analyzing them. But boy, I just feel like it has really, really died down the past 2 years. And I know part of it is it's early, and with the Cubs being really good and in these playoff runs, it obviously takes, it's more important to the city than early hockey where there's a long season. But, even last year when the Blackhawks started to kind of go on a streak mid-season and start to play really well, I just felt like it hasn't lived up to what it once was. And I did an article for Blasting News about how the TV ratings have kind of dipped the past 2 years since, 13 through 15. So I feel like the excitement for the team just isn't there as much.
It's a little bit of the Atlanta Braves syndrome, as when you're so good for so long, people lose interest until it's playoff time.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat of a good problem to have, and I mean, they still sell out games and whatnot, but what part of me what brought up this topic was the last game against the Flyers. I asked myself watching the game, I'm like, what are all those empty seats? Like, I noticed more empty seats than you normally do at a Blackhawks game the past decade. I don't know if you noticed that.
I wasn't really paying attention, but it was, tickets have been easier to come by when I watch them on StubHub, and they've been much more affordable to get, which is good for me.
No doubt.
But I think that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swirsky Sports Talk Chicago. I want to thank you guys so much for listening. Please make sure that you hit subscribe on however you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Share it with your friends. And if you want to hit us up on social media, at ShyFanPat1, at Swirsky Sports, SwirskySports.com, Facebook.com/SwirskySports. And thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan.
She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears. Oh, when the Bears go bearing down, I wanna